Bonjour, bienvenue au French Tech Podcast. Welcome to the French Tech Podcast. I'm very happy to welcome my next guest, Aaron from BTCN Asia. Hi, how are you, Aaron?
It's a pleasure to be here, thank you.
Could I ask you to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm the executive producer of BTCN TV. Our company owns a number of media. This one is a video platform on the web, and we feature thought leaders in business, technology, government, finance, satellite, aerospace, medtech.
The video platform completely on the web.
Yes. Yeah, and so we break soft news. We're not a 24/7 news channel, obviously, like a CNBC or a Bloomberg. So we do soft news, things that have a little more shelf life. And so, if we're talking about space debris or innovations in medtech, those are things that, look, if you don't watch the video tomorrow, it's not out of date already. You could watch it next week, next month.
Right.
Yeah.
And what kind of content is that? What are we talking about? Are we talking about long form, short form?
Well, we have a number of formats. We've actually collected a lot of data on what users like and their patterns and how they watch and where they drop in and out of videos.
Right.
And so we have certain standard lengths of 1 to 2 minute, about 4 to 7 minutes, but ideally maybe 6, 7, 8 minutes, over 10 minutes, and then longer format. And it depends on what is the nature of the content and how deep is it, and then we try to tailor the length and the pace and even the ambient background noise that we use and the lighting. And we found, because if you want something to feel more urgent, you light it with more dramatic shadowing.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and if you want something to feel a little more like big picture, like space, going beyond, then you have to use softer lighting, these kinds of things. And so we try to, in a sense, psychosomatic programming within the video to use lighting and ambient sound that make that particular kind of content stick a little bit better with a given viewer.
Interesting. So you're using data to get insight on how people engage with your content to try to optimize the content to maximize that engagement.
Exactly, and then once we get the data, we can sort of then reflect back, okay, well, people who like the 1 to 2 minute, and it's fast-paced, do they prefer, what about fintech? Is it big data, AI? Okay, does AI sit better in a longer form where it's a little bit slower kind of interview and it's more back and forth versus shotgun approach where it's A, B, C, D?
Right.
Yeah, so.
Very interesting. Earlier, before we started this interview, you told me that you run it like a startup.
Yes. Our company has been around in its current form since year 2000, and this is our newest media, so we treat it as a startup, and it's because, look, these days in the economy, you have to do that, because even if you're an established company and we have a number of print media, and we've been around for quite a long time, and within Singapore, we're big in certain areas of print media. But if we were to treat this in the same way we treat that, well, when we launched on day one, we hadn't created this new niche. We didn't have an audience for it, so you have to be nimble and treat it like a startup where, look, every dollar counts in terms of expenditure, but on the flip side, every single audience member that you get is a step forward. So we had to treat it as a startup regardless of being a 19-year-old company.
Right, and I think that's very interesting because that's something that more established companies often get wrong, right?
Yeah.
They get more complacent and they don't aggressively go after the growth as they should be.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you hear a lot of companies, it could be bank, it could be tech, it could be anything, med tech, and they're big legacy companies, and they talk about wanting to bring a startup culture. And you can do sort of lip service to that, or there's I think the real version of it. The real version is you have to treat it as a startup and you can't be complacent. And look, I think for almost any new company, it goes without saying that's what you do. But, in media, sometimes for us, it's a little easier to forget, and you ride on your laurels and you assume that past success is an indicator of future success. Whereas, look, some of our other media that we've had or we've sold or, in the past have been travel media, university student media. So we could be the #1 university student media in the country. It means nothing if we're trying to do things on AI and big data next.
Right, exactly. So we're recording this here in Southeast Asia. Could I ask you to tell me a little bit about what you think is one of the most interesting opportunities here for you in the region?
Well, I think we're very lucky here in Singapore because, look, we're sitting here in Singapore now, and there's dozens of huge tech events every year that come to Singapore. The world comes to Singapore now, and this is something that over the last several years has been evolving. We're a big fintech hub where I think we have the second most square footage in one location allocated to fintech in the world after Hong Kong, maybe. I'm not 100% sure on that. But, so Singapore has been growing into its role as sort of the gateway to the rest of Asia outside of maybe China market because different story there.
Exactly.
And so for us, where the real opportunity is I wouldn't say being a gatekeeper because we're not, but being one of the gates that audience pass through when they're transitioning from we don't know what's going on at a ground level in fintech, medtech, AI, big data in Asia, and we want to find out. And they pass through this gate that we've created, which is our platform, where we give them snippets, insights, ideas, input from thought leaders. And so for us, that's the big opportunity, is we don't need to invent a new corner of the industry. We don't need to invent a product. We need to just sort of facilitate this conveyance of information and insights to consumers who want to know, because the world comes to Asia, you know, and so it's actually willing buyer, willing seller, which in one way should make it very easy, but in another way makes it challenging, because you could do almost anything.
Do you have any idea on where your audience is? Are they here, or are they elsewhere, and are they interested in what's going on here?
Yes. Well, we collect a lot of data. I mean, millions of data points probably over time, right? And so we have a fairly good, but it's always an evolving idea of who the audience is. The old way to do it, example, we own print media. We used to be in radio before. You know, someone calls you up on the radio station, that's how you gauge if they like it. If someone writes in and subscribes to your magazine or sends a letter to the editor, that's how you're gauging things. Then if you transition to where we are now, you know, it's DT happens in every industry, including ours. And so I think a lot of media maybe over the last few years have struggled to segue into that next gen, which is that, okay, look, audience outreach. The audience is reacting in real time, and they may not even tell you what they think. You have to measure through metrics and analytics and read into it and interpret. Like, I'd heard a stat from someone we interviewed yesterday, and of course everyone bandies around terms like this, but 80% of companies say that they do a good job at delivering customer experience. 8% of customers say the companies do. So that's 72% gray area in there. That's really the challenge, but also the opportunity, especially for media, because people don't innovate as much in our space, you know, versus say if you're in AI, you innovate every day of the year, you have absolutely no choice. So for us, that's really both the challenge, the biggest challenge, and the biggest opportunity is, how do you have a finger on a pulse of a person who is by nature a digital nomad? You can't corner them and get them to write into or call into a radio show and tell you if they like that song, you know, that kind of thing. You have to do it a very different way, and the only way is to read into these huge amounts of data. So, and how beyond the data can you manage to construct a real relationship with the person, right? So that they'll come back and engage them in the long run. Well, that's the $1 million question and the biggest challenge. I mean, obviously we try to, and the best way to do that, and everyone talks about streamlining their user experience and things. It's about when we start to see the data, we see what they like, we see how they react, we even see what time they drop in and out of a video. You know, it's like, if I would love to have even deeper data where we could see, you know, like follow what part of a video their eyes are tracking, but there's no way to do this. But if we could, then we could deliver a better experience, and then it's really up to the consumer to decide, okay, is that the experience they want? Right now, for us, like any company, it's still some guesswork, but it's becoming every day with more data that we gather and more intel, more educated guesswork. And so the more educated your guesses become, eventually you'll narrow down to, you know, a fairly clear target. And we already have done that, because prior to launching, we did quite a lot of focus groups, like gathering intel, trying to understand our consumer. And then, you know, it's been proving if we're right or wrong now over the last like 8-9 months since we launched. So before we wrap up, maybe a little bit of a tricky question to respond to. Do you ever think about the fact that you're catering to this engagement, to maximize engagement by the way you shape your content, that it might lead to I wouldn't say a diminishment of creativity, but certainly catering to the same kinds of content in the long run, and making it so that you're always doing the same thing almost? Well, we try to be bold as much as any company can, and again, fortune favors the bold, right? You know, and so this idea of us being a startup, or if we consider ourselves a startup, we can give ourselves the creative bandwidth to try and be riskier. I'll give you a few examples. We have one segment called Country Report, and we've featured a number of countries, and one of the first that we featured actually was Rwanda. And being a francophone, okay, you would be quite familiar with Rwanda, but if and I'll just give a tiny bit of background here. The average person who's my age, your age, if they hadn't heard much news since 1994, they would assume that the country is, you know, in chaos. Actually, Rwanda has the most stable economy in Africa. 99% of Rwandans have health insurance sponsored by the state, and it's because in the intervening 25 years since the genocide, so much has happened. But because no news is bad news, and media in a 24/7 news environment is only putting out headlines, well, because things are going well and they're stable, that's not sexy. And so,
Right.
Even for us, it's like we take topics that aren't necessarily sexy, like robotics, but we think that they have value to a person who wants to understand more, because you don't need to be a roboticist. Actually, what we're catering, say, on robotics isn't for a roboticist. We couldn't tell them anything they don't know.
Yeah.
But we're catering for someone who's maybe in blockchain. And they say, well, look, I want to know more about it. I want to know about space debris. I want to know about what's going on in the world. And so that's how we try to cater. So we take creative risks, but we actually can fall back, I think, comfortably on the idea that a reasonably interested person, has an appetite for things beyond such a narrow scope.
Right.
Like, oh, it's only cryptocurrency, nothing more. It's only blockchain. It's only AI. It's a growth process. So.
That's terrific. I think that's really a great approach. And the fact that you dare to be bold and that you're taking that creative liberty is definitely something.
Well, it may be written on our headstone someday if we mess it up. But so far, so good. 19 years in, it's working.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. I really appreciate it, Aaron. I hope you're enjoying the conference here.
Yeah, it's fantastic, actually. It's been a great crowd, very interesting speakers. Anyone who's not here, if they can tune into your podcast or anything else, they should, because it's been quite an interesting event.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.